Do you think it's Fluttergate, Gamblingate,
Oh no, well, I'm very anti the word flutter because I think it diminishes.
It diminishes it. So gambling, let's call it gambling.
And I said, like, because all Chris Mason, who I respect madly on BBC, but he has used this phrase repeatedly.
Flutter, it's not a flutter.
Had a flutter.
Yeah.
And, that just, no, it's not a flutter. What it is cynically and possibly criminally using
insider dealing,
insider information while you're in public office. It's outrageous.
So also whilst you're away, the Prime Minister has been taking, as he does, taking a firm hand. Right. I mean, it's unbelievable because what should be a story that was undoubtedly and is undoubtedly very, very embarrassing. The current count, I think, is 2 candidates, 2 Conservative officials, and we learn on the Today programme, we're recording on Tuesday morning, that there are more than 1 police officers involved now. Chris Mason reported, so the thing expands.
No.
But Rishi Sunak said last night on the very good Harry Cole-Sun interviews with him and Keir Starmer, what he'd been saying all along, that he's not going to get involved because the Gambling Commission is investigating these alleged bets on the election date. The police officer we know has been arrested, but he won't suspend the candidates because Rishi Sunak says the party has launched an investigation. And I don't know what you think, but it strikes me this is pitifully weak because this is not John Dice versus John Dice or the COVID inquiry. This is a very straightforward question, which is very few people knew the election date. We know that. And it would be a matter of a couple of hours' work to ask them all and find out. And if any of them have put bets on, suspend them. Yeah. That's leadership.
Yeah. All you've got to do is phone them up.
You just got to phone them up.
This is Rishi Sunak, the Prime Minister, and I'm asking you directly, have you used insider information to place a bet? And if the answer is yes, I am asking you to honourably stand down and resign.
And what he doesn't seem to understand is that this is irrespective of what the Gambling Commission does or doesn't find. There may well be prosecutions further down the line. I don't know.
Yeah.
And neither does he. But in terms of being a leader and a figure of authority, he has shown just how pusillanimous he is. It's amazing. Yeah. Because, I mean, here for contrast, and it's an odd contrast perhaps, but it reminded me that back in 2008, when the expenses scandal was going on, one of the reasons that David Cameron was so hated by his backbenchers was because he said, no, give the money back. It was something like, the quote was, I forget the exact quote, but it was something like, I don't care if they were within the rules, they were wrong. In other words,
there's a moral aspect to it.
The political aspect to it is not absolutely, there's an overlap, but it's not exactly the same as the legal dimension.
Yeah.
And Sunak seems to have completely lost sight of this. The other thing is just politically, what's happening is that a story that should have been dealt with snappily is now dominating the election. Yeah. Which is insanity.
Mate, there's a much bigger point. And again, not to harp on, I hate journalists who, they go through an experience and they think that they're the only person it's happened to, so they must talk about it. However, not to harp on about my travel woes, but I did think we've spent the last 8 years as a nation obsessed with the fallout of a single referendum vote.
Yes.
In 2016. And the bandwidth it's taken up and the money it's taken up and just the mental energy it's exhausted. It's where we've got to a point now where politically we are absolutely at rock bottom, across the board. But everything else has fallen by the wayside. The health service, the roads, the infrastructure, the schools, everything it's cost us so much. We argue and we can argue about the 4% loss to GDP over and all of this, but it's cost us so much in terms of self-esteem, and it's cost us in terms of just getting on with day-to-day business as usual. The country has suffered to a degree that I think we won't really begin to understand until we can all take a bit more of an objective step back, maybe in a decade or so. And when that day comes, I'm sure people will say, fuck me, that was a massive mistake, and we must
yes,
try and
I don't think
address it,
posterity will be kind to this period. But it was interesting yesterday, More in Common, I think with the newsagents, did an analysis of which of the sort of events in the campaign so far have registered most with the electorate. And D-Day is by far... Sunak's early departure from D-Day is the D-Day commemorations in Normandy is by far the highest, but it's being fast approached
by the betting,
completed by the betting thing. Yeah. Now, the thing is that we're now this Tuesday, a week and 2 days till polling day.
Yeah.
Basically, this is going to be almost the closing argument of the debate,
whether or not some low rent, low moral
looters, basically looting the palace before they were kicked out.
These no marks, whether they made 500 quid, that's what we're now obsessing on. And this is my point: is that we as a country we are spending far too long talking about the wrong bloody things, the wrong things. It's not just the Tory party that's lost its moral compass. I think the whole nation has to a degree.
Well, I think that partly it's because, sleaze and corruption stories always gather pace. They always gain traction when they chime with the sense of something real and deep and political. In this case, I think it's not totally unconnected with the bigger issues, because what it is that I think the public is just disgusted. Instinctively, perhaps, rather than in a fully articulated way, with the fact that, this is a government that doesn't seem to be doing anything about sewage in the water, the real problems of health and social care, the real problems of education. It's kicking net zero targets into the long grass. And so on and so on.
And sloganeering over immigration.
There was one line, actually, it's interesting you mentioned immigration, because there was one line in Sunak's debate with Harry Cole at The Sun last night, which made me think this is getting uglier and uglier, which was that part of Sunak's sort of pitch, I guess his closing argument that he would like is, if you elect Keir Starmer, the following horrible things will happen to you. You'll be taxed more. But the other thing he said was, he said that illegal immigrants were massing, potentially illegal immigrants were massing in Calais.
Well, they're not, by the way. I was there yesterday.
But in anticipation of Starmer winning. But then he said, words effective, imagine, he did use the words on the streets, which is Trump-esque. The idea of, if you vote Labour next week, before you know it, there'll be illegal immigrants roaming the streets like zombies. And I thought, this is very depressing, because he'll be gone very shortly. But what he'll leave behind is this venom and this sort of debasement of political argument. And it's going to be very hard to lift things back up to a level where we are talking about things properly.
And do you think? Obviously we had a podcast the other last week about Starmer and Labour. Has your view changed at all about how well or otherwise Labour are doing in terms of living up to the opportunity?
I don't think so, because I think on immigration, I am dismayed by Starmer's view that he'll smash the gangs because he's had experience of terrorism and dealing with other countries and intelligence. Now, there's nothing wrong with smashing the gangs. In fact, one hopes he succeeds.
Please do,
But, one thing we've discussed a lot, and the New European has given a lot of energy to, and will, I hope, continue to, is we need a new settlement on immigration that's compassionate, fair, swift. And he hasn't really talked about that.
No.
And what he's actually trying to do is say, it's an entirely reactive position, which is, no, Sunak's wrong. I won't let zombie illegal immigrants be around the streets. Rather than we need levels of immigration for all sorts of reasons. Instead
of turning around and saying, well, look, this is just stupidity from the Prime Minister. But let's focus on the real challenge, which is dee-da. It's interesting. This morning, I've never read it before, but I read the Labour manifesto from 1945.
Oh, right.
Clement Attlee's manifesto. And because I wondered whether that was as amorphous.
Yes.
And maybe the manifesto's vague, but then
it goes on to be radical.
It goes on to do radical.
Yes.
But it's not. The manifesto is very clear.
Yeah.
As a programme, a statement of works that are going to happen
if
you
big.
vote for Labour. Mass nationalisation, public ownership of, transport, steel, coal, obviously the National Health Service, transformation homes, the establishment of a Ministry of Housing to create real
this is why
works.
Churchill so absurdly claimed that the Gestapo would be necessary to impose all this statism and centralisation.
But what's striking about the actual manifesto, and I'd commend people to Google it, it's there, and it's only about, I reckon it's about 1,000 words, something like this. One thing struck me was that it was printed as a pamphlet, and it would cost 2D, right? 2 pennies to buy.
Pennies.
So which is about 50p these days, right? But can you imagine any political party being able to charge anybody to read their manifesto?
Pay them, possibly.
But it's beautifully written. It's intelligent. It's historical. It's got a sense of where the nation's going. But then, as I say, it's got these concrete things. This is what we're going to do. And it's not just negating somebody else's policies. It's saying, no, forget that. Here's a new set of mandates that we want from you to transform this nation. And we've said time and time again, that's what's been absent from the Labour Party, isn't it?
I mean, my worry, and who knows, we won't know till we know, but is that Starmer will win a big majority, great. But he'll be a sort of omnipotent vacuity. There'll just be this guy sitting in number 10 with a world historic landslide
like
majority,
the Wizard of Oz behind
wondering,
the screen.
what do I do now? Now, I'm sure it won't be like that. But it needs to be more than what's in the manifesto and what's in the public debate, the public sphere at the moment. Going back to Sunak just briefly, it is amazing how the whole Tory machine is just now, bits of engine casing are just spinning off it. The wheels are flying off. I mean, the number of people who have now said, you got to do something about this gambling thing. I thought James Cracknell, the Olympic multi-gold medalist, saying that the Tory outfit was a shower of shit was pretty on the nose. But you've got people like Robert Buckland, you've got people like Steve Baker, from the right, and then not from the right, Tobias Ellwood, saying we really need to act on this decisively. And day after day passes, and who knows, by our Thursday podcast, when we record on Thursday for Friday, he might have done something. But it's screamingly obvious that he needs to do something. But it's too late. I mean, it's all too late. The betting thing, as Michael Gove acknowledged over the weekend in the Sunday Times, this is too much like Partygate. One rule for them and one rule for us, and it shows they've learnt nothing.
Well, this is it, isn't it? And as you rightly said, he hasn't got the street smarts, the wit to understand how this will be used against him. That I guess is the art of politics, as much as having vision, is to understand how to play defence as well. And he hasn't got the wit to say, hold on a minute, there's a nightmare coming around the corner here because this looks and smells rotten, and I need to put a stamp on it right now and get it out of the way so I can talk about things that are meaningful.
I mean, from the start, it's been right on his doorstep. So the first person, this is now run for 2 weeks, the first person to have admitted to having gambled on the election day was his own PPS, Craig Williams, right. And one of, apparently, allegedly, one of his protection officers. So it was immediately in his vicinity, undeniably so. And, I really can't think of, with the possible exception of Boris Johnson, who kind of always denies everything, anyone who would have, any recent prime minister who would have not nailed this one very quickly. It has all the hallmarks of something that is just screaming to be put out of its misery. Actually, government,
Rishi Sunak,
this government. Well, I don't know. No, I think I think there's an arrogance there still, which is, you'll see, I'll go off. I'll earn billions. I'll be in my eco pod while you're all
I'll be an American.
living in the
I'll be an American
tsunami,
citizen in a decade.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's had his secondment from the world of finance, discovered he doesn't much like democracy, and he'll go off and resume his acquisition of wealth.
Now, listen, talking of Boris Johnson.
Yes.
I got here this morning and you said we've got to talk about the Farage and Johnson melee, and I sort of, because I have basically been absent mentally for the last 2
Well, should we do this after the break?
Should we come after the break? And work? Let you talk me through what the hell is going on.
What the hell is going on?
Yeah. So Farage, and we must find out how the actual.
Well, I think he pronounces it Farage, doesn't
Farage.
he? Nigel Farage.
So there's an uplift on the first syllable.
Yes.
Farage.
Nigel Farage. But Farage, as James O'Brien does, is very good.
Our house style can be Farage. And Johnson are possibly the two most odious people in politics, in my view, are at war, find each other odious now.
Well, this is a good news story in my view, because only a few weeks ago, when Farage announced his return to the front line and running as a candidate in Clacton for reform and so on. One of the stories that was sort of circulating around was if there's a Tory cataclysm, Farage gets elected MP for Clacton, and then he woos Johnson back into politics to do some sort of SDP liberal alliance. Because
as you described Johnson as the dog that hasn't yet barked.
Yes.
He seems to be barking quite loudly.
He's barking quite loudly now. So what happened over the weekend was that Farage appears on Sir Nick Robinson's leaders' interviews and repeats a line that actually he's said in the past, but in the context of the election it seemed rather more pointed, which was that it's no surprise that Putin, he said terrible thing that Putin invaded Ukraine, but really, are we surprised given the expansion of NATO and EU? We provoked this war, he said.
Right.
And then he doubled down in a piece in the Telegraph saying that, I'm standing by my words.
If you poke the Russian
the bear, don't be
surprised.
Right. Yeah. Now, this is a very, just for background, this is a very common view on the sort of American MAGA alt-right side of the house, which is the Ukraine war is not only a waste of American resources, it's intrinsically wrong, because Putin had every right to be pissed off about NATO expansion. They're particularly interested in NATO expansion. EU expansion bothers Farage as much. But, figures from Trump to not a Republican, but very much sort of skewing to the alt-right, Robert Kennedy Jr., have been very clear on this. So it's a very sort of, it fits very much into the American right-wing narrative, the MAGA narrative. So Farage is not an outlier on this at all in the world of the right.
Yeah.
And there are people on the European right who agree as well. And so that is his view. I'm surprised in the context of an election campaign that he didn't soft pedal it, because it obviously was bound to be a story, and it was. And he's intriguingly, he's just doubled down and doubled down and doubled down. Boris Johnson then stormed in and said, that this was it was nauseating ahistorical drivel was his kind of kickoff, and it got worse from there. And actually, on this one, I agree with Johnson. I think that the Ukraine invasion was an absolute outrage, continues to be, and I hope the Ukrainians secure their freedom.
Yes.
But just to go back to your question, the row, this then put the two potential leaders of the resurrected populist right at odds, and perhaps irreparably so, because they've been continue to kick each other over social media and in articles and interviews ever since, and speeches. Farage said in a speech that he was the the worst. He said he was the worst prime minister of modern times. And so
What,
on.
really? Even
Yeah.
I wouldn't go that far with John. I mean, he's been superseded, I think, by Truss for sure.
Yes,
in that state.
But I mean, you could tell that Farage was really angry about it.
Yes.
And then, and of course, this is always interesting in sort of looking at the ecology of the right. The Daily Mail makes an absolute call
Right.
that Johnson is right and Farage is wrong, because it quotes on its front page a source close to Zelensky's office saying that the virus of Putinism is at large.
Right. Within Farage.
Well, it words it very carefully,
Right.
but it's quite clear what it's saying.
Yes.
And then Farage puts Carter Ruck on the Daily Mail.
Wow. Okay. The most feared libel lawyers
Absolutely.
in the land. Yes.
And starts, and this was the bit that I thought was comedy gold, starts claiming that the Daily Mail is engaged in election interference, right? Which is, again,
of course it is. That's what it exists
for. But I mean,
for.
what do you think has been going on for the last century, you idiot?
Where have you been?
I mean, and also on that definition, almost any newspaper or media, so that made me laugh, but it is again very Trumpian.
Yeah.
Fake news, election interference, and all that sort of thing. So that's where we are, and I thought this was quite cheering, because there is this terrible sort of sense that if Labour turn out to be a dud, the terrain of a very unequal and society in which public services aren't working, in your sense, which we began with, of the country being post-Brexit basically broken, is ironically enough fantastically fertile terrain for Brexiteers and populists.
Of course,
betrayal narratives But I'm quite cheered by this, because it shows that actually the populist right is not a monolithic thing.
Yes.
And Ukraine is probably the issue that divides them most.
Right. Which is useful, isn't it?
It is, because the people in this country, and I don't know quite why, but perhaps it's a long-term folkloric memory of the Second World War. I don't know, but there seems to be a fairly robust sense that Putin was wrong, the cause of Ukraine is right, and I think Farage really does look eccentric in this.
Yeah, it's weird, isn't it? It's not. I should just add, it's not just the right that.
No,
I remember Owen Jones tweeting about that what Europe needed was railing against NATO expansionism and saying that Ukraine was part of a buffer zone.
Yes,
and again, it's this. Which I think it's this shameful othering and sort of dehumanization of geographies of nation states when it suits your political interest.
Spheres of influence.
All this absolutely, abysmal talk when you're talking about a nation state with real people who have a sovereign right to decide their future. And if they want to join the European Union or NATO, then they have absolutely every right to do it. But the mentality that clicks in, the sort of default mentality of these people, they look at it like a game of Risk, and they're moving pieces around a board, and saying, well, that's a buffer zone there, and Farage's logic to say, well, Ukraine is a sovereign state and I support their right to do whatever they choose, and yet they shouldn't have poked the Russian bear.
Yeah.
It's a total paradox. It makes no sense at all. So there is this kind of instinctive desire for these people to see the world as political pieces to be moved around.
Like a board game.
Yeah.
A board game. And I think it's interesting the extent to which Russia plays a very curious role and unites, to your point, the hard left and the hard right. So we've just read today that Julian Assange is being freed.
Yes.
Now, one of the interesting aspects of Julian Assange, leaving aside his whistleblowing earlier in his career, was his association with Russia Today, the channel, and Putin, and some of the very hardcore people around Trump in the 2016 election.
Right.
But you have Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's a super Trumpite congresswoman, and Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, who's a super left-wing socialist Democrat congresswoman, both calling for Biden not to extradite Assange because in their different ways they have a kind of affiliation with this, and it's a very strange phenomenon, the horseshoe idea that extreme left and extreme right meet. But I think in our immediate kind of horizons, it's let's be cautiously encouraged by this, because I think what it suggests is that whatever state the Tory party is in after the election, however many, if any, MPs Reform has, it won't be straightforward for Farage or anyone else to build a sort of really nasty populist nationalist party that has any chance of power. Doesn't mean it's not going to happen.
Why, Matt? Why explain this to me, or try to? Why did the Daily Mail go in so hard against Farage?
I think this is the key question, and I don't have a.
And just to explain why it's a question.
Yes,
because we would think, we're both journalists, a lot of experience in how newspapers decide these kind of calls. And you might think there'd be a little bit more caution with Farage experiencing this upswing in popularity, and lots of Daily Mail readers saying, well, I like the cut of his jib and I like the fact that he says what he thinks and blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
And on the precipice possibly of quite an impressive haul of votes. And yet you have the most stridently Middle England right-wing newspaper in the land saying, nah, fuck him. It's curious, isn't it?
I'm sure phone calls were made, possibly involving Rothermere himself, the owner of the Daily Mail. The reason I say that is because I think that there's a good comparison in Fox News and its very, very equivocal relationship with Donald Trump.
Yes.
Which is Trump and Farage have this in common, which is their box office. They get ratings for Fox News, and Farage gets, I'm sure, sells copies for the Daily Mail.
Yeah.
However, there comes a point for every such organisation that operates in the mainstream, which, like it or not, Fox News does, and the Daily Mail certainly does, where ideological mania becomes a problem.
Yes.
And I think that in this instance, there must have been a judgment taken by Dacre or by Rothermere or who knows, that Farage had overstepped, that Mail readers would not want their paper to align itself with someone who was saying, yeah, have at it,
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating moment. How much is too much? And of course, in the case of Fox, they ended up paying $750 million to what was it, Dominion, the voting system thing, because they decided to go with the Stop the Steal narrative, which it emerged from the papers knew was a pack of lies, but also knew that it was good for ratings.
Yeah.
And I think they now look back on that as a big mistake, and they were desperate for Ron DeSantis or someone else to be the candidate, and he isn't. The parallel here is, I think, the Daily Mail, it would really like Boris Johnson still to be Prime Minister.
Yes.
Basically. And failing that, Liz Truss with a different brain.
Yeah. And of course, Johnson's got his column.
And Johnson has a column.
So maybe Johnson calls Rothermere or calls Dacre.
Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. That in itself sort of tells you where they stand and who they support. And it's interesting, isn't it, that Boris Johnson was always, he allegedly used to describe the Telegraph as my real boss.
Yeah, that's
well,
right.
he is now transferred, no doubt, in exchange for a large haul of old English banknotes.
£1 million, wasn't it?
Yeah, something like that, to the Daily Mail. And I guess they're, to a certain extent, backing their boy. But I don't think it's just that. I think it's also because, populist newspapers, populist media has to be very careful not to alienate too many punters.
A bit too mad.
Yeah. And it does make you look, in this country, it does make you look a bit mad to say, well, Putin had a point.
Yes.
It was interesting when you look back at all the analyses of the 2019 election. one of the things that cut through to what is far too loosely called the Red Wall voters was Corbyn's lack of patriotism. And specifically, you recall that when the Skripal family were poisoned by agents of Putin in Salisbury, Corbyn suggested sending a sample of the poison to Moscow to be analysed.
That's right.
Which is,
Did you do this?
Did you do this?
No, we didn't,
no,
Jeremy.
No. And we're certainly not planning to do anything to Navalny. I mean, the very thought.
Yeah.
And that this, quite a sort of technical story in some, had cut through. Like, what are you talking about?
Yes.
And for whatever reason, we in this country, we don't like the idea that Putin is entirely justified in his aggression. I suppose because
Jeremy Corbyn's another Russian Today contributor, by the way.
Another Russian Today, which it's George Galloway, right? They're all there, aren't they?
Yeah.
And I suppose it's not irrelevant that Russia's quite close compared to America. It's not a wholly abstract academic issue. This, Russia's designs in Eastern Europe and the Baltics are not. They're not abstract issues. If Putin were to continue to be militarily aggressive, the consequences for the continent and for Britain and the region would be huge, fundamental, and ongoing.
Yeah.
And I just think the Mail probably quite quickly realised that Farage had overstepped.
And I wonder whether also around that editorial conference when they were discussing how hard do we go in with the tackle, there was a sense of pricing in Farage's success at this election anyway, which is probably going to happen regardless of this issue. And also pulling the choke chain a bit and just reminding him.
Remember who you work for.
That's right. Just pull the choke chain and just remind him of how it feels when he oversteps the mark, because newspapers, for better or worse, still, even though their influence has declined by a factor of 10, since we started out in the game, still think that they rule the world.
Yes, and also in Toryland they do, because so in the world of kind of election manipulation and propaganda, it is undoubtedly the case that social media overall is now sort of pulling ahead of conventional of traditional mainstream media. But when it comes to the forthcoming battle on the right, the Daily Mail and the Telegraph Group will be absolutely central. I worked at the Sunday Telegraph during the 1997 leadership election and the 2001 leadership election and the 2005 leadership election, and in all those cases, the wooing that went on by the leadership contenders was something to behold.
Yes.
Because it mattered what those. I can only imagine what it was like at the Daily Mail and the Mail on Sunday. Yeah. So let's assume a Labour victory on July the 4th. There then is a epic civil war on the right. They will need, the contenders will need badly support in the Mail on Sunday and the Telegraphs, because
and
by the way,
Sun as well.
And the Sun, but Tory members are their Telegraph and Mail readers.
Yes.
I mean, you're right. The Sun is always important, but in a race like this,
no, I take your point. Yeah,
it's those titles. And by the way, we don't know who will be owning the Telegraphs.
No, that's right.
I mean, one of the first interesting decisions facing a Labour government is what to do about this.
That's right. Why did the Sun get to host the leaders' debate? Why did they agree to that?
Well, they're doing quite a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I maybe too much actually. Yeah. There's another. I think they've got a BBC one coming up this week with Michelle Hussein, which will be quite good.
It's just interesting that, as far as I know, it's the only newspaper title that's.
I think that's right.
And it's a curious one, and I wonder. Well, obviously, I'm a Scouser. The Sun is absolutely loathed in Liverpool. Liverpool is a Labour hotbed,
Yes.
And I wonder what the reaction is back home on Merseyside, where they see Keir Starmer entertaining the Sun's political editors.
I'm sure they have memories of Blair going to Hayman Island in 1995. I would think two things. First is I think Harry Cole, who's the political editor of the Sun, And I remember when he was a Tory blogger called Tory Bear.
That's the Guido Fawkes.
No, that was even before that? Right.
Right.
And he's actually become a very good political editor, and he was excellent last night.
So he has made a succession of snide remarks about the New European.
I'm sure he has.
However, I have to say his interviewing was very, very good.
And he likes us personally. It's just because I think the Sun can't really be, anti-Brexity. But I mean, he I think did a very good job. But the truth is, I think it's muscle memory. I think it's just that, particularly, Starmer's of an age, what is 61, he'll have grown up with the assumption that the Sun decided elections.
Yeah, that's right.
He'll have, he's been he hasn't been an MP for that long, but he's been a Labour member for a very long time, and he'll remember the Sun's role in 92 and in 97, which was consequential.
Absolutely, yeah.
So if any newspaper was going to get a debate, it was probably going to be the Sun, I suppose.
Last thing before we wind up for this week, because also we should say that this is, how many days is it now? It's a week on Thursday, right?
It's a week on Thursday.
And yet it still feels, I know I've been out of the loop for the last couple of days, but it still feels like it's in soft pedal territory.
Well, I think because really, it was the point you made earlier, is that, I mean, look, election campaigns are always scrappy and pugilistic and full of irrelevant, tangents and so on.
Yeah.
But aside from the ludicrously irrelevant tax cuts stuff, as if tax cuts are what we need at the moment with the public estate in its, tax cuts are nice, I guess, but that's not what we should be arguing about. So there hasn't really been a substantial debate. No one's talking about Brexit. We've discussed that many times. No one is talking really about how they're going to sort out the NHS. Certainly no one is talking about how they're going to sort out social care.
Yeah.
I mean, the list goes on.
Yeah.
I can't think, I don't know if you disagree, but I can't think of a sort of specific substantive issue where there's been a proper to and fro between the parties, other than, putting tax on private schools.
That's right.
Now, actually, that's probably quite good for Labour, because that's a decision where it's a tiny amount of money it'll raise, and the consequences of state schools are unknown, because there will be an outflow of pupils to state schools who can't no longer afford to go to private schools, all that. But it showed, at least on this very small thing, that Starmer was willing to pick a fight and take a few blows.
Yes.
Because he has been accused, you're denying social mobility to people. Yeah. And he has said, well, I had to make a decision. Do I want to see money spread about the system or continue to give a tax break to private schools? You can carry on sending kids to private school, but you can't have this actually rather peculiar tax break.
Yes, that's right. Well, you say yes, except I understand the principle that education shouldn't be taxed, and it's.
Yes.
I remember standing up at as a sort of precocious kind of students in Liverpool at an SDP hustings with Shirley Williams in the constituency of Crosby, and asking precisely this: what was the thinking behind because they were campaigning to withdraw the charitable status, which was the same sort of principle.
Sort of thing.
And so, it's been an issue that's been bubbling around for a long time. And people, and so, you're right. It's to Starmer's credit in this instance that he's.
But it's a very small thing.
It's 1.5 billion, isn't it, or something like this?
Yeah, it's tiny.
And it's so in the great scheme. Of things,
but we've been talking about the election now for 4 weeks.
Yeah.
And that's all I can really think of. Has there been a big debate on Britain's place in the world?
Mate, talking of 1.5 billion. Did you see the astonishing photograph on the BBC website this morning of the £1.4 billion worth of PPE being buried in landfill?
Happy memories of Michelle Mone, eh?
Well, yes, except this one wasn't. This is a company, to their credit, who were already in the PPE game.
Yes.
So not profiteering opportunistics.
Yeah.
But the directors of the company relocated the business very rapidly to Jersey, where you don't have to declare how much profit you've made, bought a £30 million coastal residence in Barbados, a £6 million house, and a stud farm somewhere in Hampshire or somewhere like this. So they've clearly made enormous profits.
Yeah.
And here was £1.5 billion worth of PPE being buried in landfill. You know, if you want a sort of a picture of Britain in the last 8 years, there it is, folks.
I mean, you put your finger on it, really, which is that when you came out of COVID, one would have hoped that there were the lessons learned after all the suffering and the difficulties of lockdown and so on would be, we need more international collaboration, we need more strategic thinking, we need to invest more in the NHS.
Yeah.
None of this has happened.
None of that's happened.
And John Bell, Regis Professor of Medicine, has said, we're not ready.
Yeah.
And it's not that long since the pandemic happened, actually. I mean, people act now as if it's the Second World War, but actually it was just the other day. And, new variants are still being found of COVID, by the way, folks.
Yeah.
And we are probably in a worse position than we were, unbelievably, before COVID hit.
Despite having lived through it, yeah.
And all the wrong lessons were drawn from it. Now, I really hope, I would love to think that one of the first 100 days things that Starmer does is set up is restore the infrastructure at least.
Well, listen, to bring it full circle back to Clem Attlee, the whole point was win the peace.
Win the peace.
Now we've been through COVID, and we've been through the economic crashes, and we've been through all these cataclysms. This is where Starmer's got to deliver now. He's got to win the peace.
He has got to win the peace, and he's got to not just say, we've got a very difficult inheritance.
That's right.
Obviously, he'll say that.
That's right.
But
Clement Attlee didn't say that. Clement Attlee said, what can I do? The whole bloody place has been knocked down by the Blitz.
Second World War,
what can we do? Look at the state of it. He didn't. No. He said, right, here's how we're going to rebuild.
I mean, actually, you're spot on. Attlee is the role model, isn't he?
Yeah.
Because obviously Blair isn't. Wilson doesn't really map onto Starmer.
No, Attlee's the man. Yeah.
Quiet, restrained.
Also conciliatory. Don't forget, he was Deputy Prime Minister throughout the war.
He'd been...
so he knew what collaboration looked like.
Yes.
And in fact, one of the things in the manifesto was talking about the Ministry of Food and saying what a great job it had done. And they were going to try and continue that through into the... So, politics was very different back then. And I think
if I was Starmer, I would, after the election, I would try and peel off, if there are any Tory moderates remaining in the parliamentary party, I'd try and peel a few of them off on cross-party task forces.
Yeah, good idea.
It really works well. But Blair did this on Europe with Clark and Heseltine, and it was fantastically successful.
Right. Now, we're going to go in a moment, but I do want to tell people about this week's New European little bit, because, one, there's a fantastic cover by the great modern artist We Fail.
It's brilliant.
And it doesn't matter whether you know about The Shining or not, but it's a kind of pastiche of that great photograph of Jack Nicholson in the party where he realizes that it's all kind of and it's the headline is The End of the Party, and it's almost really a commemorative issue to the Conservative Party. But it's a very striking cover. But also inside is a brilliant wall chart, free of charge. Every single Conservative seat and constituency and candidate, like a bingo card that you can, as the night rolls
on,
you can cross them off, and you will be left with your own unique memory,
a souvenir, a very special night
of the predicted Tory wipeout. So that goes on sale.
No, it's a brilliant thing.
It really is, and it's on sale on Thursday. And if you subscribe. There's a great subscription offer from just £1 a week, and you get a £25 voucher to spend at the New European shop. But if you like the newspaper, and I love getting a newspaper, dropping through the letterbox every single week, then you can have that from just £2 a week, price of a bottle of water. So go to theneweuropean.co.uk/2mats and do the right thing, please, and subscribe and help us carry on and do more of this journalism and more of these podcasts. We'll thank you very much for it.
And we'll see you on Friday.
We will see you on Friday. Have a great week.
Have a great week.